Hi, everybody. Welcome to this third episode here on this podcast, Who is in My Pew? This is a podcast made by the Church of St. Pius X, Laurenville, New York. We are so glad to having you here for this third episode. We have today Theresa with us. We are so happy and we feel so blessed to having her to talk to us, to share her story with us about her Catholic journey, different experiences, challenges, and we are so glad to having you here. Theresa, introduce yourself and thank you for being here today.
Yeah, well, hi everybody. I'm so glad to be here. I was just joking with Father Dan that this is supposed to be for young adults, but I'm like buttoned up all the way. I look so very prim and proper, and I wore fun shoes because I thought we would be sitting in lounge chairs and they would be like, "Oh, she's young, she's wearing fun shoes," but I probably look like I'm 80. But anyway, yeah, hi. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, it's good to having you here. This is a moment to be relaxed and to share about your story. Tell us a little bit about your life.
Yeah, well, I want to start just right off the bat. I don't want to steal the podcast. I know you're the host, but I just want to start with sharing kind of how this came to fruition. Not the St. Pius podcast. That was on you guys. But I honestly moved home to start my own podcast. And for an entire year, God was trying to get me to do this. And I was not doing it. And it really led to some serious downward spirals. But finally, January 30th, I was like, this is it. I'm going to put it up there. My sister's like, yes, go do it. Strike while the iron's hot. And I put it up there. And then I sent it to Kirsty, the director of youth ministries. And, oh my God, what happened after that? And then after that, I made my goals for 2026. And I was like, I want to be on somebody else's podcast. I put on my vision board. I'm going to get yelled at for that. I wasn't manifesting, okay? I just put my goals on pictures on a board. And I honestly put a picture of Jordan Peterson, not that I thought I was going to be on his podcast, but just him speaking on his podcast as if like I was the one he was interviewing. And then a few weeks later, I got a email from Nick that was like, hey, do you want to be on the St. Pius podcast? I was like, wow, God, that was quick. He was like, just put your podcast up there and the rest will happen. But come to find out, Kirsty said that I think a couple minutes after I sent her my podcast, you guys walked in the room and you were like, hey, do you know anybody that'd be good to be on the podcast? And she's like looking at her phone. She's like, yeah, actually I do. So I don't know. I always hear about cool God stories and I always wanted to have a cool God story. And I feel like that was a little bit of a perfect timing.
That's awesome. I love this idea to have a podcast. It's a new way to talk to people. And I remember having this conversation with Father Walsh and Nick. We always said like something that we're missing here. And it's definitely a podcast. That will be a good opportunity for all of us to know who we are. Yeah. We're very blessed to have a large community here. Yeah. But it's, people they can come to me and say, Father, they share stories with me and it was always fun. Yeah. And I said like, this will be a wonderful opportunity. We feel so blessed to having you here. One of your goals.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Dawn, thanks for being here in this little podcast that we're just starting. But I know the people, they will love to hear your faith journey, your experiences. And, we always start this podcast asking, the people, the guests about their childhood. Share a little bit about your childhood, good memories about your childhood or related to church or not, or.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll say there's kind of, in terms of my coming to faith and actually understanding what God is and was, there was kind of this parallel story going on. To answer your question, I had a fantastic childhood. Awesome. We literally had a dirt pit in our backyard. Our parents, for my brother's 8th birthday, had a dumpster just bring dirt. So not a sand pit, but a dirt pit. And we just loved it, right? And we did stuff up at camp, like just a great childhood altogether. But in terms of faith, and I want to be careful here because I don't want to hurt family members, but in terms of faith, it definitely seemed as though I grew up in a more ideologically Catholic household. Go to church on Sunday, but come home as my siblings started to enter their teenage years. I'm 4 years younger than my closest sibling. Okay. So I'm pretty far behind them. My oldest sibling is like 8 years older than me. So I definitely got to watch them kind of go through the teenage years and young
course.
adulthood from afar. But during that time, things kind of got more tumultuous in the household, as stands to reason. But the sentiment got to be, if you don't go to church, or at least as it seemed from my perspective, if you don't go to church, then my parents, they don't approve of that. And it almost seemed like they were trying a little bit too much to force us into the box of religiosity, as opposed to trusting God with the, I guess, arc of mine and my own siblings' faith and journey, I guess, to God. But with that, growing up, it definitely felt more like I went to church because I wanted to gain the approval of my parents.
Of course.
It felt like it was more rooted in pride as opposed to it being genuine. So I was, I saw, oh, hey, they're disapproving of my siblings for what it is that they're doing, for what they're not going to church. So not only am I going to go to church on every Sunday, but I'm going to be a sacristan. I'm going to be a youth minister. I'm going to be singing or playing the flute in youth ministry music or whatever. So I definitely played the part of being a Catholic, but I don't think I was. And I even came into Father one time to have a little discussion with him and ask him a couple questions. And I said, I think I'm doing faith wrong. And he's like, what do you mean? And I don't think I could quite dictate what I meant at that time, but I think I was going through the motions. I was checking things off of a box. I thought that God was a dictator in the sky looking down upon me, saying, do this and you'll get to heaven. Don't do that and you're going to hell.
Like a judge. God, like a judge doing things.
A condemning God, so to speak.
No good.
As opposed to convicting. And that was kind of my view of God. And I thought, well, I'll get to heaven if I just check things off of a box. So that was kind of the one story that was playing out, was the wrestling with faith, because even though I was going to church, I was still questioning, like my parents, or my mom specifically. I was just asking her a ton of questions because I thought, if this is true to the core, then there's got to be an answer for everything. If you believe this to be the foundational truth of life, then there has to be an answer for everything. And I'm going to continuously ask like an annoying little child would. And I didn't just do that when I was younger. I continued to do that throughout high school and into college, and just continue to kind of ask those questions. And
do you remember any, like, one of the top questions you asked your mom?
The top question?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good question.
Because we always have like memories asking the parents, at least my parents, some questions that they have no answer and they try, but they keep that.
I don't remember specific questions, but I just remember lying on the kitchen floor having this 10-year-old crisis. Maybe not 10, I might have been a little bit older, but I was like, but why this? I'm just lying on the floor, and why this and why this? Kind of trying to push her buttons a little bit, because I was like, I'm testing your faith, sister. Like, if you think this is the end all be all, not sister, she's my mom, but if you think this is the end all be all, then there must be an answer for everything.
Yeah. And that's I understand, and actually I'm very happy that you have that experience, because when you ask about your faith, when you challenge the people who is teaching you about the faith, your parents or whoever is teaching you, that's amazing, because you are really paying attention to the message you receive. Do you remember any memories about your time in church when you were a child?
I remember, so I used to work as a sacristan, so I'd be here all the time, and not all the time, but at the end of Mass, I would pick up the cards and clean up the pews. And I just remember standing and looking out one of those large windows thinking, I'm going to get to the bottom of this. Like, I'm here, and it feels disingenuine. I don't think I probably had the verbiage to even say the word disingenuine at that time, but I just had this knowing of, I feel like a phony almost, but I'm going to get to the bottom of this. And for whatever reason, I feel like my parents are right. I feel like faith is a thing. And eventually, I feel like I did come to a greater understanding of God. Kind of, I said a parallel story. At the same time, there was this development of disordered eating and body image issues and depression and anxiety. And the two stories kind of culminated into one, where my disordered eating helped me understand this problem of what is God and what is faith and what is religion. And faith, God, and religion helped me come to more peace with all of that. It all culminated into like one moment. I call it the peanut butter story.
Yeah. Tell me more. You are now speaking about an issue, eating disorder. And, I know this is something that our youth people is dealing with right now. When that happened, you were a teenager or that was?
Yeah. So I was a competitive gymnast for many years. I say as though I was like amazing. Awesome. I wasn't that good, but I still loved it. And I did it for like 25 hours a week. So I did it for a long time. But in that sport, just, you're around a bunch of really young girls. Everybody's in good shape. So you're standing in front of a mirror for a really long time at practice. And so just very aware of what you look like. And not only that, very aware of how incredibly strong you are. But I ended up quitting gymnastics probably, when I was in high school. And the day that I got home, I was crying my eyes out because I'm leaving my friends, I'm leaving my coaches. And I got home and I sat on the couch crying my eyes out, and verbatim these words reverberated. I don't know if that's a word, but echoed in my mind. It was, now you have to figure out a way to stay in shape. Verbatim, a very antagonizing kind of phrase, thinking back to it. But then I made it my mission of, okay, well, now I have to restrict what I eat. I have to work out more because I'm not at gymnastics 4 hours a day. And it kind of spiraled into the typical cycles associated with a lot of disordered eating, that restriction and then binging and then feeling out of control. And then in turn, and I just learned this recently, where individuals with depression typically don't look at the system that they're living their life by and saying, oh, something's wrong with the system. They turn on themselves and they say, oh, something's wrong with me. So I think I kind of did that at like the subconscious level because, and this is just associated with binge eating, there's so much shame and guilt. So then you just continue to spiral downward. And it just continued to cycle through periods of binge eating and then hyper restricting and calorie counting and working out and just continuing to go up and down that cycle.
Okay. How was your prayer life during that time? How was Jesus related with all these problems? Because you mentioned you pretty much experienced a lot here in the church, working here as a sacristan, youth ministry and things. But how would you connect back at the time when you were dealing with that, Jesus Christ, with all these food disorder situation?
Yeah. I felt very abandoned, honestly.
Very abandoned.
Yeah. And confused because I would pray, but again, it kind of goes back to like there's different levels of prayer, and I eventually learned that, but it was very much so just like, take this, here's this prayer, God, fix this.
We call that superficial prayer.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. Where you just
fix this.
Yeah. You're like, here's this huge problem.
The magician, God, the magician.
I was waiting for God to pop out of the sky and wave his magic wand. Yeah. That was definitely what it was like. I would still go to church, but again, like in college, I went to Marist, so it's like a beautiful little chapel and campus, and I would go almost every day, and I'd probably just like cry in the pew sometimes. I would just sit there, and again, it's so pathetic to think back on because, as you said, I was waiting for this magician to just appear before me and to fix all of my problems, and I think that goes back to what I said to Father Walsh one time. I think I'm doing faith wrong. I was just waiting for him to descend out of the skies as if I'm so deserving. That's
a very important point, and that's exactly what I said. Most of the time when I'm preaching, we have these expectations of God to fix things for us, but sometimes we are not just paying attention of our connection with the Lord. We just expect him to change things, and God is not acting in that way. Of course, now he's always manifesting himself in different ways, but we have people God is doing miracles all the time, but it's not very common to see God acting in that way. It's more like we understand ourselves, and then we know why he was acting in that way, in that particular thing. And do you remember coming to church during those times?
Yeah, I would definitely go to church again. Kind of now I'm like in my brain, I'm thinking more to college. I would still go to church on Sundays. But again, it was very waiting for him to come out of the sky. There was this period of time where it was a little bit more of me acting more virtuously, to put it in the Catholic language, having more prudence and diligence, not necessarily associating it with those words, but at times where it was just a little bit more on top of my life, and it didn't feel like I was kind of drowning with this problem. Did I put the two and two together, that me being more prudent and virtuous, so to speak, was faith? No, I just, like, that's what you should do. You should, act, take care of yourself, so to speak, and take care of your life. It didn't all kind of change until more recently, again, where the two kind of came together, and church had a different meaning and prayer had a different meaning.
What is the meaning right now for you?
Well, I'll say kind of going back, so like in this little parallel story, so to speak, and I talk about this with the kids in confirmation. Not kids, well, they're kind of kids, but young adults, which just feels weird to say because I still feel like a kid sometimes. But I moved right out of college. I moved out to California to work out there for a little bit. And I had no friends out there and not a lot of, actually, I should say no family. I have family in Southern California, but not in Northern California. So I was very alone, but it really provided me the opportunity to be with all of my thoughts and all of the everything that was just going on the inside. When I moved out there, things didn't get better. I was coming off of school where typically things are more regimented. You have a routine. So the disordered eating was a little bit held under wraps. And then all of a sudden, routine is completely abolished. I'm in a new place. And I literally walked 6 miles round trip to and from the internship. Anyway, it was a whole thing. I only bring that up because
it's a different world in the other side of the country.
It was a different world. I didn't have a car out there, but I only say it because I built up such a large appetite from these really long walks, and it led to, me trying to control, and it led to just terrible binge eating, spiraling downward, depression, and then again reverting back to that place of desperation and waiting for God to fix everything. At the same time, I was working in a lab, and you don't have to be in constant communication with people, so I could just listen to podcasts all of the time. And I remember,
by the way, that's why we have a podcast right now, because we know this is the way.
There's somebody in a lab listening right now.
Listening right now.
They're
this
learning
podcast.
So much. But yeah, it's certainly the new medium for. Well, it's not even new at this point. But anyway, I was listening to so much, and I remember among the many things that I would listen to, I came across one of Bishop Barron's videos, and he was talking about pride. And he was talking about, have you ever read a really good book and you just lose yourself? And he goes, that's kind of your pride melting away. And I now kind of say it's like a communion with God is when you're not hyper-focused.
Yep.
But on top of that, I read this quote from St. Gregory the Great that says, pride is the root of all sin.
That's one of my favorite sayings.
I love that
him.
saying.
Yeah.
That saying, I should say. I don't know much about the saint. But from there, I kind of stepped back and I thought, all the while I've been going to church out of pride, and I've been going to church because I think I'm going to go there and it's going to completely dissolve me of this problem. And I might get in trouble for saying this, but I felt convicted to stop going to church. I really did. I mean, I went because I wanted to flick my hair and I want all the old ladies to think that I was the cutest little Catholic girl. Yeah. And oh my God, bless her soul, she's going to heaven. And so I finally had this kind of thought of, this is disingenuous. And you're going there to honestly just fill time and to think that once you leave there, God is going to make your life easy for you. And I kind of started doing this thing, and all the while too, I'm listening to podcasts from like Jocko Willink and like Navy SEALs. I don't know why, but I like need a drill sergeant in my head, and they're all talking kind of more about discipline. And I started to kind of just pursue what I knew like deep down to be the truth. And at that moment, it was, you're going to church because you want God to wave a wand, and that's not right. And from there, I kind of just started pursuing the truth, and I started taking more action, like what I knew to be true. I don't mean like these fleshly desires. It was more like, oh, you don't want to do that thing, but you know you need to do that thing, kind of that thing that requires courage and faith. I was like, oh, you're doing that thing. And I started to have more faith and just do the thing that I knew I needed to do. I knew I wasn't qualified to be these kids' tutor because I started to do some part-time work, but I also just deep down knew, oh, but I can teach 6th and 7th graders. And it turned to this amazing side opportunity. I needed the money, and the woman whose kids I was tutoring was a journalist for a really long time. And then it led into writing opportunities, and it led me to realize that I like speaking over camera. Even though I get nervous, I like getting out of my comfort zone. So anyway, I started pursuing what it is that I knew to be the truth, and I started taking a little bit more action, I guess being more prudent. And sorry, I'm really droning on here, but it'll come to the God moment. Eventually, I was really homesick. And so I thought, you know what makes me feel more at home than going to church on a Saturday evening at a chapel that feels like Blessed Sacrament, where I went when I was really, really little. And so I was like, I'm not going just because I want to, turn my hair. I'm not going just because I want people to see me as a little Catholic girl. I'm going because I'm homesick, and I'm going because it feels a little bit more genuine. And I went, and I had this experience. It was like a knife to my heart, where I kind of feel like I felt the pain that I had caused my sisters growing up, my siblings growing up, from not approving of them and kind of having disgust towards them, 1, to gain my parents' approval, and 2, because they weren't going to church. Like I felt that pain because I was like, well, I just didn't go to church for a couple of months, and does that make me unlovable? And I kind of could feel like, oh my God, if somebody felt that towards me, that's the pain I'm feeling right now, and that's what I did towards them.
Absolutely.
And that was kind of this first moment of, oh, Jesus is all merciful, and sure, he has rules and there are laws in place, but he's looking at us with this gaze of love, regardless of what it is that we do, and this mercy. And I felt like I finally had the opportunity in the knowing that I could look at other people like that too, and that I didn't need to see myself reflecting back at me in other people. I felt like I needed other people to affirm my faith in order to make it real. I needed my sisters to be Catholic in order for it to be the truth. And I realized, oh no, I can just see them for who they are. I can love them for who they are, just as God would do, just as Christ would do. And if your faith is genuine, you don't need to push it or prove it to anybody. You don't want anybody to follow it just because you need to fulfill it. You want them to follow it because you want what's best for them. And that doesn't mean you shove it down their throat. If the opportunity arises, then you can share it with them. But if not, I don't know, carry on and pray for them, but don't like disapprove of them with this kind of disgust.
That's a wonderful, wonderful point that you are speaking now. That's a very important point for our faith, because sometimes we do things paying too much attention about what the people think about us in our relation with Jesus Christ. And even if we show up in Mass, we have these preconcepts, prejudice from different things. But it's good that you underline that what we need is a personal relation with Jesus Christ, the Lord, more than, of course we need the community, but at the end, the Eucharist, all the sacraments, everything that we are doing is about our personal relation, be connected with the Lord in different ways, and trying to help other people to be connected with Him as well, without any judgment. And that's awesome that you understand this faith journey in that way. Do you remember your prayer life back at the time? When you started this transition from what the people think about me versus now is my personal relation with Jesus. I need Him. I'm here because I need Him more than anything else. And do you remember your prayer, reading a book or podcast or YouTube, or how would you improve your spiritual life through all?
I'll say again, this is all kind of like within the span of months where I'm learning. It feels like where I'm learning what actually faith in Christianity is. So that was kind of the one thing.
What do you think Christianity is right now? What do you think about?
What do I think it is right now?
The meaning of Christianity, because you said
I think it means to pursue the truth with courage.
Awesome.
And I think that Christ pertains the truth.
Yeah, he is the truth. Yeah. Awesome. Go ahead.
But yes, in terms of prayer, as I said before, I thought Jordan Peterson talks about it like God being a gumball machine. So that was kind of what I was doing. I was like, here, take this, and then you give me the gumball. But I might get in trouble for saying this, but one time I was watching the Kardashians. As one does. I was keeping up. Okay. I'm youthful. And I was watching Kim, and think what you want about her. Like she's a beautiful woman. She was when she was younger, not even wearing makeup. And I just thought, here's her life. Like it's pretty chaotic and there's a lot of silly drama, but she does her makeup in the morning and she cares about how she looks, maybe too far on the spectrum of vanity. That's for other people to decide and debate about. But I was thinking, she takes care of herself. Like she gives herself some form of love. Like she wills her own good. She wants what is best for herself. And I had this thought, because again, I'm like struggling with body image and eating disorder. And I thought, I don't take care of myself. I don't want to do my makeup anymore because I hate the way that I look, and I don't want to try to accentuate beauty on top of it's like, I don't want to put makeup on a pig. And here's this woman who other people would say lives such a chaotic life, and they would judge her and view her, yet she puts her makeup on in the morning. She shows herself an act of kindness. And I kind of had this thought of like, when women do their makeup in the morning, it's like pointing them towards beauty. It's like pointing them almost towards God. And again, it can go down the rabbit hole of vanity if it starts to near in that direction. But I was not doing it as almost like a form of self-punishment. And I just had this feeling of, I want to do from here on, like after watching this episode, I was like, I want to do everything that is ultimately best for me. And I don't mean like I want to disregard other people. I mean, I want to start taking care of myself. Like, I don't want to work out just to make myself look a certain way or because I have to check something off of a box. I actually want to will my own good, like the true ultimate love.
Yep. And
so from there, again, like I was not at this time going to church and stuff. So I was like, I'm going to sit here and meditate. And I like turned on this peaceful music. And I remember telling a spiritual director later on, and it was I just allowed the thoughts through my mind to just go and to just notice what kind of stood out to me, what convicted me, what didn't convict me. And I started to do that every morning. Again, I had this conviction of, you know what, I just feel like I need to wake up at 5 a.m. and go to the gym. And before doing that, I would put on some peaceful music and I would just sit there and I would listen, whatever the word is, to what was on my heart. You
probably new age music or mindfulness
just some peaceful music. Yeah, it would be considered probably what I was doing a new age practice, but it was like all leading me back to prayer. I was like, oh, maybe this is what prayer is.
Yep.
Because I started to
all have different ways.
Yeah.
To connect with
Jesus.
Jesus.
I started to notice the things that convicted me, and I started to pursue those things and realize what happened in retrospect to them.
Okay.
So that was kind of what was the prayer. And then it was after the fact, and there was me getting there, but after the fact, I started to read the Bible. I was like, oh, you rise up early in the morning and you pray. Well, it makes sense. You're calm in the morning. Yep. There's less happening in your mind. There's an opportunity to hear God as opposed to hear the voices of other people and maybe hear the voice that is not God.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the whole point of the daily mass and things like that. It's just beginning the day thinking about God, putting God in our day. And that's exactly what we need as Christian people. Different ways to put God in our daily life. I always said, like, it must be some point during the day that we stop at least for 10 minutes. And, like, Jesus, show me, let me think or focus on the blessings I'm receiving from God until this point of the day. That's good that you underline that. And, okay, you have this kind of meditation, morning meditation, and what else you did in your...
Yeah, so I definitely started doing that. And like I said, pursuing whatever I felt, quote unquote, convicted to pursue. And then I started to notice, well, what happened when I pursued that thing? And I was starting to learn, well, what's the voice of God and how does God speak to me? So I always say God speaks to me like a punch of fear to the stomach. It's less fear now that I feel a little bit more courageous, but it's always like a little like, oh, you want me to do what? But anyway, I started learning that. And again, I still wasn't going to church. I was just having these epiphanies. And then I listened to... Sorry, I know I mentioned him a lot. I just really like his work. But Jordan Peterson, I started to listen to his Maps of Meaning. And he also, of course, has a biblical series. But within Maps of Meaning, he does part of the biblical series. And he started to explain the Bible from a more, I guess you'd say, psychological level.
Okay.
And he started to explain it as a narrative and as a story. And once you read the Bible as a story, you're like, oh my gosh, it makes so much sense.
Yep.
If you do X, it leads to chaos. If you do Y, it tends to lead to order. And God is kind of the thing in the middle. And that is kind of how Jordan Peterson was explaining it. And everything from there just started to make sense. Like I started to read the Bible, and as I said, it started to make sense. Like, oh, rise up early in the morning. Well, now that just makes sense at like a deeper level. It's not rise up early in the morning to check this off a box so you can go to heaven as what I was doing prior to that. It was, oh, this makes sense. Like I want to now get up early in the morning and pray because I feel like it centers me towards God. It puts me more in alignment with him. But that was kind of one of the things that happened is it felt as though I was reading the Bible as a narrative or listening to it more as a story.
Do you remember any story from the Bible that you really like back at the time?
I think
there was like, wow, this is a story.
I think him explaining Christ walking up to Golgotha, on Golgotha, to Golgotha, and dying to the cross. It just started to like fireworks in my brain make sense of you have to let your pride subside in order to be reborn. Yeah. And that's what Christ did. It was ultimate humility, pursuing God. He was pursuing God to his death. And I always tell the kids at confirmation this. People think like they hear, oh my God, Jesus is so cool. I just love him so much. And they hear this and they think, oh, being a Christian is weird. They're like, what is this Christ? You love him so much. I'm just thinking of like the Southern Baptist. Like, I love Christ so much. And I can't wait to go to church. And they're thinking, how do you love this thing? And I always tell them, I'm like, Christ, he's not just like this man that you love. He is incredibly courageous. I mean, he is God, but he is doing what it is that he was meant and put on the earth to do to his death. That is like, and I always use this example because influencers is like a thing for young adults. I'm like, that is as if you are called to be an influencer and you're a little bit nervous, but you put yourself out there and then you put your stuff, you pull the stuff down and you don't do it. You go in your room and you hide and you cry. And then you put a little bit more out there into the world of whatever it is that you're called to do. But then you're like, no, I can't do it. I'm like, if God was an influencer, he put himself out there every single time without question to his death. And I tell them, I'm like, that's not weird. That is incredible.
It is. It is. And it's beautiful. I love that passage as well, because before the Golgotha, it was Jesus Christ going into deep prayer, asking God the Father, like, help me.
Yeah.
This journey to the cross will be difficult, but, I'm here. I will put myself there for the people. And I love that passage. And, I loved your story about these reflections about the cross. Any other memories about your time reading the Bible during all
reading
that
the Bible
process, and prayer life?
I remember I went to church at a different church, and I needed a Bible because I didn't have one with me at the time. And they gave me, I think it's like a child's Bible. If they had given me any other one, I would have got bored and not have read it. It was just the New Testament. But I just remember reading it, and again, just highlights, like things started to make sense more at a deeper level as opposed to just reading the words. I started to kind of understand it in a different context, I guess. I'm trying to think if there's any specific Bible passages. Yeah, I don't think there was. I think what was really resonating with me at that time, again, St. Gregory the Great's quote, "Pride is the root of all sin." And then this idea of Christ allowing him to essentially, well, he is God, so it's like a weird comparison, but as if he would, like, the person allowing him,
He was a human being.
He was a human being, so allowing him to decrease essentially and God to prevail. That idea of like, your pride has to go away and you have to walk with ultimate humility. Yeah. So I started to use that to push myself in my work and other things of, you gotta put yourself out there for judgment and ridicule if it's what God calls you to do. So I think that really stuck out to me.
Okay, if a younger adult approached you today and he said or she said, I'm dealing with this food disorder, and you have to give that person an advice after all this journey that you did, what will be your advice to that person today?
Yeah, I just did an episode of my podcast on this.
What is the name of your podcast?
It's called The Heights of Beauty and the Pits of Hell. Sorry for
where
the
we can find that podcast.
Plug. It's on YouTube and Instagram at Heights Beauty Pits Hell, or you can just search at Theresa FitzGibbon. Anyway, I just did kind of an episode on body image, and what is more of an abstract piece of advice, a philosophical piece of advice. It is not by way of perfection that will root you out of this problem. It is by way of perfect love.
Perfect love.
So ultimately God is perfect love, but I try not to say that because I'm trying to like hint at God without being super cryptic. But this idea that you cannot hate yourself to a heavenly state. You cannot hate yourself into a state of grace. You have to love yourself. And the word like loving yourself gets a really bad rap because it's like, oh, I love myself, the self-care, all movement and everything. And as Jocko Willink says, sometimes discipline is the greatest form of self-love, because I think going back to that point of perfect love doesn't necessarily mean, oh, you just look in the mirror and you love yourself. Yeah. It means you do what is ultimately best for you. And if you're struggling with disordered eating, if you're struggling with body image, that means if you've had a bad day, you had a bad moment, you don't go in your room, close the door, and continue to spiral downward. You don't self-sabotage. Mm-hmm. Somebody who loves you, they wouldn't want that for you. Your loved one wouldn't say, you know what, you just binged ate, you're worthless, go in the room and do nothing, turn the lights off, spiral downward. They wouldn't say that. So it's this idea of no one's coming again to like pick you up and make this better. You have to be able to will your own good. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to do that when you're doing things that are so self-sabotaging. It's kind of like the opposite of self-sabotage.
Okay. That's awesome. That's awesome. Wonderful. And, I'm always always amazed when people that are especially dealing with food disorders or image problems is their way to return to the faith, because now you have to put God first than you, and that's amazing. It's amazing that the journey you did. Okay, now you are teaching people about Jesus Christ. Now you're helping the Jewish people to be close to Jesus Christ, to do what you did in all your faith journey. How is their experience? Tell us more about that. How you feel doing that. What about that? Speak about that.
Yeah. I can't say I'm like the biggest evangelist.
Okay.
Maybe God was working on me, but I'll do it in the context of, well, if I'm helping kids at confirmation, they are there to talk about Christ. But I can't say I'm doing it in a way where it's really blatant. I think through my podcast, I'm trying to hint at these ideas, because that's kind of what happened to me. Was there was these Christian sayings that I would hear in the past that didn't make sense at the time. Again, they felt like words and just ideology. But it wasn't until I kind of had this coming to God, this coming to Christ, where those words started to make sense. So it's almost like saying them in a way. For example, I said in one of my episodes, you can't walk around viewing yourself. This is something that never made sense to me until recently. Like, God was like, here, finally, you can have this knowledge. I was always wrestling. What does it mean to have your identity held with Christ? What the heck does that even mean? So your identity is held. I just had no idea. But eventually, and this is kind of what I was telling in my podcast, of you can't walk around thinking about how people are possibly thinking about you. And again, going back to this idea of body image, is typically it's this idea of like beating people to the punch, self-sabotaging, telling yourself that you're unattractive before people have the opportunity to do so. Going around thinking everybody in this room thinks that I'm ugly and I'm hideous. And I think that they might be thinking that, and I want to beat them to the punch. So in order to do that, I'm just going to tell myself that I'm unattractive, that I'm hideous, that nobody would ever want to talk to me or anything like that. I'm going to beat them to the punch because it hurts less coming from me than to coming off people. And I finally had this realization of, that means you have your identity. You are viewing yourself based on how it is that other people are possibly viewing you. They're probably not even thinking about you. Who do you think about when you put your head on the pillow at night? I don't know, maybe a loved one, but I don't know. You're probably just thinking about, I'm thinking about I want my coffee the next morning. I'm not thinking about anybody in my day. So putting our view, thinking about ourselves based on the possibility of what it is that other people are thinking about. And I had this realization of, well, you can't view yourself that way because it's leading to self-sabotage. How does a loved one view you? They want to will your own good. Oh, that's how you have to view yourself. You have to put your identity in somebody who loves you. You have to put your identity in the one who loves you. Oh, your identity is held in Christ. You walk around with mercy. It doesn't mean you like all of your decisions, just meaning regardless of what it is that you do, you have this view of mercy and wanting to will your own good and carry that throughout your life.
Yeah, that's amazing. We're images of God. We're created as an image of God, and that's what we teach in the church. And also, that's a wonderful point. This is not about perfection. Nothing is about perfection. It's about try to be like Christ, acting good, taking care of the people. You're speaking about identity. That's our Catholic identity. Is understanding each one of us as members of the body of Christ equal. And sometimes I think today is a huge problem, especially with the younger generation, with all of us, we are not at all. And to think about, what are the perceptions about me from other people? And we pay too much attention to that. And, how we can do, how do you think we can do to move from that superficial view into a more realistic view? Like, you know what I mean? Like how we move from what the people think about me into how I can improve my own view of myself. How do you think we can do that? I don't know if that question is clear, everybody. I'm sorry, my abstract English, but
No, that was clear. How can you move from being stuck inside your own head as opposed to viewing yourself? I think one of it is maybe like a little bit of grace. Mm-hmm. It's really hard to get out of your head, but I think it also comes back to what Bishop Barron was saying, where your pride subsides when you're doing something that you love to do. And so I really think doing the things that you love to do, where you're not stuck inside your own head, or helping other people, where you're not just consistently thinking about yourself and thinking about how other people are viewing you. Oh my God, am I awkward? Am I weird? Did I do this? Did I do that? But that state of, oh, I read a book and I just forgot about, when I was a little girl, I almost missed my bus stop because I was so stuck in this book. That type of forgetting about yourself. I think the more that you find those things, the more you pursue the things that you're ultimately called to do and that you love to do. God designed, you probably love something. You probably love to do something because God designed you to do it. I don't know, writing, reading, singing, etc. And the more you do those things, I think the more you're communing with God. And so the less you're like hyper fixated on just what it is that other people are thinking. And you start to draw away from that hyper fixation, and you're communing with God. So you're walking towards God, so to speak. I don't know. I think it's finding those things that you're called to do. And they might not be easy things. They might require courage, but I think it's
grace. You say
things.
Grace. That requires grace. Yeah. Grace from heaven to that. Theresa, if somebody asks you today, for you, what is God? What is your answer? If somebody, what is God for you? God.
Yeah.
That's a hard question. You know, we never ask that because we think about this supernatural reality, but you know.
Yeah. To get there, I want to explain my peanut butter story because, again, this is what I tell the kids at confirmation. But one morning, I was living out in California. Again, so much happened in California. It was like a year-long meditation just to be with all my thoughts. But I was walking down the stairs, and my roommates had pizza out from the night before. And I was like, you know what? Who doesn't love to crush a piece of pizza in the morning? I'm going to crush one. And I could sense myself, since it's ingrained in my neurochemistry and my body, I know how to binge eat. I could sense myself inching towards that, thinking, oh, you've already ruined the day. Let's just continue down this path of self-destruction. I don't know what it was, but in an instant, it was as if my entire neurochemistry was like reoriented. And I had this thought and this feeling of, Theresa, God is not telling you to put the pizza down because he hates you. He's telling you to put the pizza down because he loves you and he wants what is best for you. Mm-hmm. And I finally understood, like it's a sin, not because he hates you, but like, well, gluttony leads to shame and it leads to spiraling downward. It just all of a sudden it started to make sense. So what is God? God is that thing that is within you, that wants to will your own good. And you really only have to know, like you can only know kind of what that is, since it's a living God. And you have a personal relationship with God. And it's the same for everyone. It's perfect love for everyone. It's constant. It's consistent. It wants what is best for you. It wants what is best for me. It wants what is best for Nick. It wants what is best for everybody. But in a time, in a moment, what it is that God is willing you to do is dependent upon your relationship with Christ and what you're made to do. But regardless of that, it's always constant, it's always there, and it's always willing your own good and the good of everybody else.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. That's a powerful
Is that right? I just shared my definition of God to a priest.
No, that's awesome. That's awesome. That's practical theology is how we call that, is when we put our relation with God, the meaning of God to all of us in simple words in our daily life. Theresa, any spiritual practices that you are doing right now, a book that you would like to suggest, or a specific podcast or video or movie that you would like to suggest to people to be anchored with Jesus Christ, to connect with Jesus Christ, the Lord, especially after this story about, food disorder and everything you deal with in the past.
Yeah, I love podcasts. I call them my podcast fathers. These different podcast hosts that have just taught me so much. But anyway, a great podcast for kind of Catholic theology, I guess, of course, is Pints with Aquinas with Matt Fradd. Good mix of philosophy and
Good one.
great stories from other people. For women, I would say the Abiding Together podcast is really good with Sister Mary. Of course, guys can listen to. It might not resonate as much, but of course I can listen to. That's a really good one. In terms of disordered eating and binge eating, not a Christian podcast. Her name is Rachel Wrigley. It's not specifically a podcast, but she has videos that just really resonated with me and helped me kind of honestly lean towards Christ a little bit more, even though she's not Christian.
Yep. Yes. Okay. That's awesome. Theresa, we always finish this podcast with a question. If Jesus Christ shows up here right now, today, in front of you, what you will say to him?
I'd be like, I'd be like, I don't know what I'm doing. Did you hear all of that? Some of it was probably really wrong. What would I say?
Yeah.
Oh God, it depends on the moment. Like right here in this moment.
Yeah, right now.
I would probably do that. I'd be like embarrassed. I'd be like, sorry, I probably just said some things that are wrong. I'd probably do that. Not out of like shame, but just out of like, and then he would just like, I imagine him just staring and be like, don't worry, I got it from here.
I love you. I love you.
Yeah, he'd be like, I'll fix whatever you just messed up.
Okay, Theresa, thank you so much for all this time that you dedicate to this podcast to share your story with the people here at St. Pius and people from other different churches. I hope you enjoy all these stories as I did. And Theresa, tell us your social media and your information if somebody wants to follow you. And go ahead.
Yeah, so my personal Instagram is at Theresa FitzGibbon, all lowercase. From there, you can find the Instagram that I'm building for my new podcast at Heights Beauty Pits Hell. But I would just suggest going at Theresa FitzGibbon, and then you can find it. And then the YouTube is the Heights of Beauty and the Pits of Hell.
Okay, when you come to Mass, this is the last question because I'm always, when I'm preaching, I can see where people sit. People is very consistent with the same pew.
Yeah.
Where in the church do you sit when you come to Mass?
So I'm either standing in the back pacing because I sit at work for all week and I'm like, I can't sit anymore.
Okay.
So I'm either sitting in the back getting some steps in or in the center, I forget what it's called, but the center a little bit like in the middle.
Yeah, we call that entrance main. That's the main entrance.
As one would think. I don't know why I just didn't think of that.
We have main, chapel side, and the other door is Stafford.
Main
door. Theresa, thank you so much. God bless you. And I hope everybody enjoyed this podcast. This is a lovely opportunity to see you all. And I hope you continue watching and listening to our podcast. God bless you all. And, we'll see you soon for that new episode with another amazing story about how Jesus Christ is transforming hearts of people. And just remember, we are always anchored with Jesus Christ the Lord. He loves us so much. This is not about perfection. This is about connecting with Jesus Christ in a very special way. God bless you all. Bye-bye. Good to see you. Ciao, ciao.